company, presenting alongside Seema, Dr. Lucy Cook, pharmaceutical physician at Wiltshire Pharma. Lucy qualified from Dundee University Medical School in 1999. She initially embarked on a career in general practice. She entered the pharmaceutical industry in 2003, working in the sales and marketing role, and since then she's held various posts within medical affairs, including Deputy EEA QPBV, supporting medical information, regulatory affairs, PV, commercial and business development. Lucy founded Wiltshire Pharma Limited in January 2017 to offer contract pharmaceutical physician support to various organisations. She's currently an educational supervisor for pharmaceutical medicine specialty training and is undertaking further training to become a revalidation appraiser. Lucy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and good afternoon to you all. Thank you for joining us. Looking ahead to what I'll be covering, I will talk you through the planning aspects of market research and the questions that we'll need to ask ourselves before embarking on any. We'll be thinking also about the requirements from code perspective. So the general theme throughout will be the ABPI Code, but taking in the BHBIA guidance that is written in collaboration with the ABPI. We'll then look at aspects of vigilance, which Seema will take you through, concerning the collection of adverse events and product complaints, with some thoughts on the type of studies involved, and then a final quick mention of the final report. So, when we're planning market research, we'll need to ensure that there are SOPs that may well be in existence that we'll need to adhere to. This may be a number of SOPs, but it may just be one. So ensure that we've read and understood and are adequately trained in this SOP. When we're thinking about the market research, we need to have one big question, or maybe a series of sub-questions below that. So we need to think very clearly and focus our activities around the questions that need answering. And also consider how will this information be used ultimately. We need to think about the population that we want to ask. This may well be healthcare professionals, but it also could be patients. We need to consider how many responses will be needed before we can obtain meaningful results. It could be that a more focused questioning within an advisory board meeting may be a better way of gathering the answers that we need. And as a quick heads up, we will be hosting an advisory board meeting webinar soon, so look out for that one. The interviews may be online, they could be on the telephone, but there could also be face-to-face interviews with the materials that are to be used. Consider also the budget that you have available. I very much recommend using an experienced market research agency. Indeed, the company may even have a trusted partner in this. The market research agency will help guide you on some of the expertise aspect of questioning, and I'll come to that in a moment. There certainly needs to be PV training for those involved, and Seema will cover that in a few moments. So before we embark on any questions, a bit more planning, consider the structure of the interview and consider also carefully the phraseology. This can be critical in the type of information that you'll finally get out. Commercial and medical should carefully compose this and agree it together. Don't rely on the code person examining the materials to refine this for you, as they will really be concentrating on code aspects and not on the activity of market research and making sure the results are meaningful. This is really where your market research professional can be crucial in obtaining quality information from the respondents. The careful questioning is critical. Consider also that multiple choice questioning may be helpful for ease of analysis where large numbers of participants are involved, whereas the open responses may give you the granularity of information that you're looking for. And the old adage applies, rubbish questions will give you rubbish data. So moving on, overarching this, as I've mentioned, is the ABPI Code. So as per the ABPI Code, any market research activity and the associated materials don't need to be certified, but they must be examined within your approval systems. The legal and ethical guidelines that are in existence have been drawn up in consultation with the ABPI and the BHBIA. There's also very helpful guidance online on the collection of adverse events and product complaints, which we'll discuss in a few moments. So, looking more carefully at some of these requirements, the pharmaceutical company involvement must be made up front, and the company can remain anonymous, but this must be revealed, if required, by the PMCPA, so it must be available to the market research company. There must be, as I've already said, a valid and clear research question with the justifiable numbers of participants. It mustn't be so many participants involved as to look promotional. As you would expect, all materials used with the participants must be fair, balanced and accurate in their information, ideally non-promotional, but branding kept to a minimum. Of course, there may be occasions where you want to test a certain piece of promotional material, and this is permitted, but just be limited in the amount of promotion that's used. There may well be confidentiality statements and templates that you can tap into within your SOPs that can satisfy some of these requirements already. There will also, unsurprisingly, need to be a written contract, as you would do in the use of consultants. So in advance, this must be signed, outlining the nature of services, the basis for payment, ensuring that they're reasonable and fair market value, and reminding the participants that they need to declare that he or she is a consultant to the company whenever they speak. The use of consultants must be legitimate, and so that must be reflected in the agreement. And again, ensuring that it is clear from the outset the number of participants involved and their expertise. There must not be an inducement to prescribe, supply, administer, recommend or sell any sort of product. And also remember your requirements in the payment of these consultants in terms of disclosure of payments. At this point, I'll hand over to Seema to discuss some of the vigilance aspects.
Okay. Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me okay. So looking at the pharmacovigilance aspects now, and certainly market research has come under the fire quite a bit during inspection setting, especially with MHRA inspections. There has been a huge focus on this area. So first of all, just looking at the legislation and the regulations, Module 6 is where we refer to market research. This covers ICSRs. You have a definition here of market research, and these are considered solicited reports. So anything that you get from market research is considered solicited, and you would need to perform a causality assessment in some way, usually from the company perspective, to decide whether it's an adverse drug reaction or an adverse event. As Lucy has already mentioned, we have the BHBIA, the Legal Ethical Guidelines for Healthcare Market Research, and this is a condition of membership with the BHBIA that any market research company must collect and report adverse events and product complaints as well. As Lucy also mentioned, there's guidance on the collection of adverse events and product complaints from market research, and this is a joint publication from the ABPI PV network and the BHBIA. I think it is important to highlight, though, that that is really only relevant for the UK. However, again, provides good guidance that could be used in other territories as well. So if we look at what we need in place within the company, we've talked about SOPs. So whilst you have SOPs that do talk about how you go about market research, how you choose the right company, how you get it reviewed and signed off with, or not signed off, or certainly reviewed within the company from a code perspective, you should have an SOP that details how pharmacovigilance should be involved as well. Because pharmacovigilance does need to be involved with the market research activities beforehand, so that they can check that everything is in place to ensure that any of those events can be collected and reported as is needed according to the regulatory requirements. I think it's always helpful to have a tracking system of some kind. I know people hate Excel, and you've got so many different tracking systems around the place, but it's a good way of showing that you've got a handle on what market research is being carried out, and that PV knows about it as well and has been involved in the setup of that research. I think, as Lucy has already mentioned, your contract should be extremely clear with regards to how pharmacovigilance is going to be managed, adverse event collection, what forms you would use, and the time frame for reporting. One thing to bear in mind is that whilst you're carrying out the market research, there may be situations that come up in that research that you would need to take into consideration. So think about where you have products that are where you have a marketing authorization for that product. However, it may be not the focus of the research, but it may come up in the research. So you do need to think collaterally with regards to these things. Also, you need to think about obviously collecting your adverse events, your complaints, but your special situations are important as well. So your pregnancy, lactation, misuse, overdose, medication errors, and things like your transmission of infectious agents and interactions. So it's the whole gamut. It's not just an adverse event, a case as would traditionally maybe be thought of for people outside of PV. You would normally state exactly what time frame you would want to receive this information. Usually it's 1 business day. And if you have a product complaint, then you would want the lot or batch number as well. Reconciliation is mentioned because you do need to ensure that you've received all of the events that have been reported from that market research program, and you would perform reconciliation on that. That should be covered by your SOP. Oh, sorry, I'm finding my way around. There we go. So if we look at the types of research now, you have your primary ad hoc market research. So this is where you're going out. You've got usually a company will perform this for you. Go out to the healthcare professional, and you are meant to inform the healthcare professional prior to carrying out that activity with regards to collecting adverse event information or product complaint information, so that they know that you are going to be doing that. You should also ask if you can approach the healthcare professional for further details later on to get follow-up information about that event or complaint. If they refuse, they can still take part. I mean, they are able to refuse to be approached for further follow-up information, but they can still carry on with taking part. If you're performing your research with patients or consumers or caregivers, it's very much the same. You have to inform them that you have an obligation to collect these adverse events. But when that information is transferred through to the marketing authorization holder, you shouldn't have any personal patient details. That shouldn't be forwarded. It should only be enough so that you could have a valid case, so age, gender, for example. You should try and ask the patient to get permission to contact the healthcare professional, very much in a similar way if you had a medical information inquiry, so that you can go back and get further information or validate as necessary. So if we look at digital media now, so here in the same way you would state up front through that digital media that you are going to be collecting information on adverse events, whilst you receive the transcript back in the office, and you should ask permission up front to forward on contact details if there is an adverse event reported. But again, very much in the same way, if they say no, then the healthcare professional can still take part in the research. Now, syndicated studies is where you have market research that's carried out not for a specific company, but they've carried out they can carry out different types of research, as we all know. They have data that is available then for the company to purchase in some way. Now, there's no obligation of the market researcher to report to the marketing authorization holder if they're performing this research, not on the basis of an MAH that has actually sponsored it in some way. But if you purchase individual records as an MAH, then you would need to go through and process individual adverse events. But if you're purchasing aggregated data, then you don't need to do that. You only need to do that when it's at the individual patient level data that you are actually buying. For longitudinal patient databases, it's very similar to module, well, not very similar, basically you follow module 6, which talks about the fact that you wouldn't report on an ongoing basis, but you would summarize at the end in the final report. And then lastly, from a PV perspective, the training is extremely important. They do have the BHBIA Adverse Event Training Program, slightly different in the sense that it is slanted towards the market research aspect, what you would pick out, not just your AEs, your complaints, but also the special situations as well. And there is a recommendation that market research employees, those that are involved in that questioning, should be trained according to the Adverse Event Training Program. Pharma employees as well, working with market research, should also perform this training, although they will have their own training within the organization. And normally you get a certificate from this, show your proof of competency and that you've carried out that training, and that should be kept ready, made available. And in fact, certainly from a review perspective, you would look for that when you're looking at your market research companies and who is performing your training. And this is done on an annual basis. So I'm going to hand back to Lucy now.
Thanks, Seema. Yeah, just a few final words. So the final report will be a summary of the findings, and whilst you're probably using this for internal intelligence to guide future decision making, it could also be used in a summary as a promotional item, but of course make sure it has been appropriately approved through your approval systems. So in summary, we've taken you through some of the planning thoughts before market research occurs, pointing you towards relevant SOPs that you should have, as well as the questions, the flow and the nature of the research that you will want to undertake, thinking about the participants, their expertise and numbers. Then we moved on to the Vigilance and Code requirements, as well as aspects of using consultants in market research and the documentary requirements around that, and my last mention of the final results. So thank you for all listening, and we appreciate your attendance. If there are any questions, Seema and I will do our very best to answer them. Michelle, have you got any questions that have been submitted online?
No, I've not seen anything come through. We will be sending a recording of the webinar after, and if anyone does have any questions afterwards, please feel free to email back.
Hello, hi, it's Seema here. Sorry, I was just going to say that I'm not sure if the questions are working properly, because I know somebody submitted one, but we can't see it. If there are, there we go. So this is from Frial. So it's about information being collected on specific forms, such as the CRF, AE forms. Yes, there are forms that are available, and they are available as part of the guidance as well, that you can pick forms from that guidance basically and use them for your market research for collecting the information. And it will have the relevant fields that you need really to process a case. Does that answer your question? Yep. Okay. Are there any more questions? That's an interesting point. Do the market researchers get training by the MAH? So, not normally, because they have the competency document that shows that they have had the BHBIA training, and the BHBIA training, bit of a mouthful, is considered appropriate. However, if there was a feeling within the company that they wanted to train on something specific, maybe there are specific issues to do with the drug from a safety perspective that they would want to highlight to the researchers, then you could go and train as the MAH. But generally, you would rely on the BHBIA, and you would expect them to have a competency certificate for anyone, for an individual that is actually performing the research. Okay. Great. I mean, this does seem to come up a lot, and certainly I think the actual activity of putting it together and understanding what questions you need to, or what question it is that you want answered, is a different point. But the PV side seems to be a big issue with the MHRA and the regulators at the moment. So you really do need to be on top of this, because it does come up as major and even critical findings in inspections. Okay, anything else? No, I think Lucy's nodding her head there and saying thank you. So there are no other questions. I think we'll leave it there. Please do let us know if there is anything that you think of after leaving the webinar. And thank you very much for attending. Thank you. Bye-bye.